Hello and welcome to the Flipside. I've got an exciting guest for you today with a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and that is detoxing. I have done detoxing in my private practice, and I've done detoxing with clients as a health coach for many, many years using a variety of different products. So the person I have today is an expert in this field. Spencer Feldman has been working as a researcher, an inventor, a formulator of detoxification products for probably 20 years or more. He holds multiple patents and is considered widely among people in this community about detoxification as one of the leading experts in this discussion. So I'm very excited to bring him into the podcast, and I think we're ready to do that. So let's go ahead and bring him in, and we'll get this ball rolling. Spencer Feldman. I got you got on mute right there.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, you're good. You're good. You're good. We are recording right out of the gate, so just so you know.
Okay. And let's see if I can get the. Alrighty. Excellent. Just so you know, I don't see myself on the screen for some reason.
I don't know. I can see both of us right now. I'm not sure what's going on there.
All right, give me a second just so
Yeah, take your time.
uh video. Okay. Well, it doesn't matter.
Well, Spencer Feldman, welcome to the Flip Side. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you. I've been wanting to have this for a while. I know of your background from my own understanding, but there are some parts of it that I really don't know. I don't know your educational background, what your experience was coming into this, and also what led you to do this. I know you've been doing this for a couple of decades, but what made you decide to get into this realm?
So, I wanted to be an emergency room surgeon when I was in college, and there was a measles or a mumps outbreak, and I did my due diligence and stood in line and got vaccinated. And I didn't put it together until later that was why right after my hands started shaking really badly, it caused some neurologic damage, and so there goes being a surgeon. And so I got into alternative medicine, started studying with some of the old German doctors and their techniques, and I went to acupuncture school. And I hadn't really healed myself up enough to be a good acupuncturist because that takes an incredible memory, or at least it did then. You have to memorize all the herbs of all the ways they connect, all the acupuncture points. So I said, okay, I can't do that. My mind isn't sharp enough yet. So I kept studying, and what I was initially doing, Michael, was I was just trying to fix myself because I wasn't healthy. And I guess I have a different way of seeing things because I was a mathematics. That was my degrees in mathematics. So I kind of look at things like math puzzles. And so I would look at the body like a math puzzle. I'm like, okay, we have all these variables. How can we figure out what feedback loop is causing what? And what ended up happening is some of the doctors that I was chatting with, when I would share what I was inventing for myself, they would ask for that. And so I ended up realizing, oh, I'm a formulator. So I've been making, okay, all right. So I've been making products for the last 30 years, and, came up with 4 new ones in the last 2 months. I just can't seem to stop.
Very fascinating. And your story is actually, I'm sure it connects to a lot of people in a very similar way, because a lot of people especially in alternative health, kind of found their way into some of these roles because of problems that they had themselves that the Western medical community was just not able to help. And so they found their way into alternative avenues to try to fix themselves.
Yeah, it's a common origin story. Is that what happened for you? Or did you go down the more traditional?
It's very funny because I've all through chiropractic college and through so many other seminars and webinars and different things, everyone's always talking about their story and how, they got an adjustment and it fixed them and their migraines went away or their whatever. And I'm sitting in the back of the room going, I got into it because I thought it'd be a cool profession. I had no problems. I had no issues physically. It was just really, I wasn't geared mentally for being a medical doctor. It wasn't never really kind of floated my boat. It wasn't something I wanted to do. And so I discovered chiropractic and went to college to get that. I already had my degree in exercise science. So yeah, there was no medical problem. It was just a matter of looked like an interesting career. And here I am 26 years later. So
Right.
yeah. Well, your company, and it is your company, right? Remedy Link is yours. Yeah, that's what I thought. Remedy Link, which I'll show here in a little bit to everybody, and I will of course attach the website in the description of the episode. Is all detox, and I've been familiar with this for a while. In my private practice, I did some minor detoxing with patients, and then as a health coach, I've done a lot of that through the Pampa program. I know you're familiar with the Pampa program. Your protocols are very different than some of the, I would say Andy Cutler's protocols are probably the most common ones used in a lot of different areas. But you kind of have a different approach. Your protocols are very different than Andy Cutler's protocols. So I definitely want to hear the way that you come about that. But let's start off a step back. And for a lot of people watching this, they're not going to really understand some of the terms that we're going to be discussing. So give us a definition of detox as a generality, and then the specifics like what differentiates a chelator from a binder, etc.
Sure. Okay. So we're exposed to things in the environment, metals and toxins. There are infections that create toxins. Our body creates metabolic toxins, and we have systems to remove them. Now, if a toxin is water soluble, then it will leave on its own typically, right? It'll just go into the blood, it'll get into filtered out by the kidneys, into the urine, and out it goes. So for detox, the body has more trouble with is the toxins that are fat soluble. And because all of our cells are made out of lipids, right? The membrane is lipid. That means that a fat soluble toxin can get into the fat or into the lipid membrane, and then you can't wash it off. You can't rinse it out, right? So, it's sort of like if you have a greasy dish and you dunk it repeatedly in warm water and you pull it out, the grease hasn't left. But through chemistry, if you put a little soap in with the water, the soap interacts with the grease in such a way that the grease now becomes water soluble, and now you can rinse it out. So soap is the detox, right, for greasy dishes. So what we need is to know what kind of soaps do we need for the toxic fats, the toxic greases that are in the human body. And so detox to a large degree is rendering fat soluble toxins water soluble. Now, there's a couple of other aspects to detox. One is some things will form crystals, like metals will crystallize. Like gadolinium will crystallize as gadolinium phosphate. So you don't need a soap for that because it's not fat soluble, but it is insoluble in a different way. It's insoluble because it's a crystal. And crystals have to get below 7 nanometers before they become soluble again. So then the question is, how do we get the toxins out that have become crystallized, which is another form of insolubility? And then the third thing that you'd mentioned was binders. And the idea behind a binder is, okay, we've got these toxins on the move and they're leaving, but we want to make sure they don't get reabsorbed back in on the way out. So for instance, you might spend a lot of time or energy at the body metabolically in the liver, turning a fat soluble toxin into water soluble. And the names for this technically would be phase 1 and phase 2, right? Phase 1 is where you take the toxin and you unmask or attach a polar group, which is like a grappling hook, right? And then phase 2 is when you add a conjugate, like the famous one would be glutathione, but there are others, to the grappling hook. Now this toxin grappling hook conjugate mix is water soluble and it can go out. And then depending on its charge and its size, some of it will come out the bile. Now, if it gets into the bile, liver to bile to the gut, right? If the wrong bacteria are in the gut, they can deconjugate, they can split the work of phase two and it reabsorbs. Or because these toxins are dissolved in bile and the body recycles 95% of its bile, it can get reabsorbed back into the bile. So the idea of a binder is to interfere with that process, to keep it so that once the liver has done its job, rendered these toxins water soluble, put them into the bile, we don't double dip and get them back again, which is called enterohepatic recirculation. Now, there's other recirculations, but that's the most well-known one.
Yeah, I like the way that you've got some very good analogies. We're going to get into your sprinter one a little bit later because I love that analogy. I've always said, and please absolutely correct me if I'm wrong about my thinking on this, but you've got to be able to get the toxins out of the cells, and then you've got to prevent them from redistributing once they come out into the interstitial spaces and into the blood. You can't just let them recirculate and then find some other home, right? So you've got to have something to stop that. That's where the chelator is coming in, correct?
Well, a chelator is specifically for metals, right? So the redistribution can happen with metals or with chemicals. So the way the process happens is we've got these toxins, we'll call them fat soluble, right? They're in the membrane or in the cell, and we are going to trigger phase one, which historically was done with a coffee enema, right? We have coffee suppositories that we use with that. And so we've triggered phase one. Then you want to have the conjugates there, the glutathione, the sulfurs, the peptides. There's a whole bunch of them, each for a different class of chemicals. And that binds onto what the phase one did. Now it's soluble. Then there's a little pump on the cell that's going to pull that toxin out. So that pump has to be functioning. That's phase three. Okay. Now, one of the risks is I tell people you never want to be a snow globe, right? You don't want to, just I usually have one for demonstration
Purposes.
Just imagine I'm shaking a snow globe and all this stuff is going everywhere, right? So you don't want to be a snow globe when you're detoxifying. You don't want stuff going all over the place. You want to make sure that it's getting to its proper pathway and draining out. One of the ways in which detox goes wrong is if you do phase one but don't do phase two, right? You're triggering the toxin to go through one of its two transformations and you're stopping there. And this is not this is a commonplace thing to some degree because the human body tends to have run out of the conjugates, right? So phase one is the cytochrome P450 enzymes. Nothing gets used up in phase one, right? So you can typically do phase one repetitively as long as you're not blocking those enzyme pathways, which is another more advanced topic. What runs out is the conjugates. It's the phase two because that's a physical thing. You have to keep adding to it, right? So if you don't have enough phase two, then you stop there. And what you've done is you've now made that toxin polar, or you've given it that little grappling hook. It is now worse than it was before. So better not to touch the thing than to do just phase one in the absence of sufficient phase two, because now it's going to get into the DNA. It's going to be much more reactive. And this is a thing that's, isn't necessarily expressed we need to discuss this in the field. Never do phase one until you're sure you have an abundance of the correct phase two for what you're detoxifying. Now, if a client comes and says, I've been exposed to DDT, I've been exposed, this, that, or the other, then you could say, oh, well, you're going to need glucuronolactone, or you're going to need this conjugate or that. But most people who are going to come to you in your practice with detox issues, it's just going to be a broad spectrum of toxins. They're not going to know necessarily what solvent they got and what pesticide they were exposed to. And so you just got to load them up with all of them and and make sure there's an abundance there so you never get that phase two crash.
Yeah, that was always my understanding too is you want to layer what you're putting into the body. So, and you have the sprinters and the marathoners, and that's kind of your idea of the layering. You're putting things in there to kind of take care of all the different scenarios, so that you don't have that redistribution because you didn't create enough to cover all the scenarios.
Sure. And this is how multiple chemical sensitivity plays out to a degree. Now, there's more to it. For people that have everything allergies, there's other things going on that need to be addressed. But for instance, three people walk into an elevator and with someone who's got too much cologne on, and two of them, their body goes phase one, phase two, none. The multiple chemical sensitivity person goes phase one, crash. That cologne that's now been made more toxic, now they're really feeling sick because they have actually internally participated in the production of a more toxic end product. And so when you can start working on a detox, should very rarely be even noticeable, right? Except in the most extreme cases. So in an extreme case, sure, maybe 2, 3, 4 days where they don't feel so good. But what you want, if someone, all right, there's something called a detox trap that I'll discuss, Michael. So the detox trap is someone gets a product that was not properly designed or is not appropriate for them, but more likely not properly designed, right? And so they take this product and they go back to their doctor and say, "Doctor, I'm taking this product and I really, don't feel that great." And the doctor says, "Good job, stay with it. You're detoxifying." Day two, day three, "Doc, it's not getting better. It's even getting worse." "No, no, hang in there. There's an end to it." After 10 or 15 days, they won't call their doctor anymore because, they feel like they're a failure. What happened is the snow globe effect. They didn't have the proper mix of things that become more toxic. Um, so another possibility is they go and let's say they take some chlorella, for instance, and then the doctor looks at their urine and, "Look at all these metals you're releasing. This is great." Or maybe some improperly made zeolites. "Wow, look at all this aluminum and lead that's coming out of you." Well, maybe, or maybe what's going on is the zeolite and the chlorella wasn't properly QC'd. They absorb toxins, and if they were in a toxic environment, the zeolite came from a place in the earth next to a large amount of lead, or the chlorella was grown in the Chinese Ocean next to effluent off of industry. What they're seeing in the urine is actually what they're getting from the product. So, you know, if you're feeling, it's okay to feel not so great during a detox for a maximum of 3 days. And each day it should get better. If it's not getting better each day, if it's not getting less intense, something's up with the detox.
100%. I 100% agree with you. Yeah. Yeah. I got a couple, there's so many different pathways I want to go down here. So let's back up just for a second, because you've alluded to this a couple of times, and I'd love to get your opinion on this. So there's going to be people that are saying, well, how do I know, if I need to do a detox? Now, of course, there's lots of answers to this. Let's look at this two ways. One, common symptoms that a person might need to have a detox. That's one. And then the other is testing. I have my opinion about testing. I'm sure you have an opinion about testing. I don't know if they're going to be the same. I think a lot of the testing is highly inaccurate. There's a lot of things that can create inaccurate readings with laboratory tests with this. There are some that are better than others, obviously. What would you say to a person? Symptoms, how do I know? And then also testing. What would they do for testing?
So, assuming we can get good testing, which we can't always do, right? Then we have the issue of finances because people are not coming in with, blank checks. They, if someone has a chronic disease, they're already probably not able to work very well. They probably already spent a lot of money on a lot of things that didn't work. So we want to, or I want to manage the budget of the client so that they don't spend money unnecessarily. Now, would you spend $100 a year to check the oil of your car? Would you send it off for a microscopic analysis? You're like, no, I know that I have to change the oil every 5,000 miles or every 6 months or whatever the schedule is, because that's just part of what it is to drive a car. We've seen enough cars, millions of cars. billions of miles driven. This is just what it is. So there's a baseline detox that's probably not a bad idea just because you live in the 21st century in an industrial civilization, right? So do you need to test for that? No. So it depends why someone is coming. So for instance, if someone says, hey, doc, I don't have any real symptoms, but I see how my parents are aging. I'd like to do that a little more gracefully. I'd like to have a little more energy. My mind, I would like to be able to remember things a little bit better. I don't want to be 65 and then I can't have a retirement because nothing works properly. And as I'm seeing with some older friends, so what do I do? Okay, for that kind of person, you can just say, okay, well, here's your yearly maintenance schedule. We're going to clean out the bile out of the liver. We're going to take the metals out of the kidneys. We're going to take the chemicals out of the liver. We're going to work on the microbiome. We're going to take some toxins out of the brain. You're good to go. That's one person. Another person comes and says, hey, you know what? I have these symptoms and I'm wondering, could detox help? Right? So what is it that causes symptoms? So symptoms can generally be broken up into two classes, right? You can say symptoms are things that are deficiency states, right? Someone was vegan for a while, they're B12 deficient for 7 years, they've got neuropathy. Okay, that's a deficiency state. So for deficiency, we identify the deficiency, we give them what they need, and we accelerate repair, maybe it's some peptides or something. And then you have the excess, right? These are things that, so if deficiency is what you should have had, iodine, magnesium, selenium, B12, protein, but didn't get, we add that in. And excess, and now you can see the Chinese medical thinking in my way.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Right. So the excess would be something that's there that shouldn't be there, right? So that could be, from a chiropractic standpoint, dystrophic calcium in the joints. That shouldn't be there. It's it's locking things up and it's irritating nerves. It can be any of the toxins. They shouldn't be there. Lead, mercury, arsenic, cadmium, gadolinium, plasticizers, forever chemicals. We want those out. And often the way in which symptoms happen is through inflammation, right? So the immune system doesn't just fight infections, it also is part of the detox pathway. Macrophages will go and they'll pull out toxins, or they'll try. They aren't necessarily suited for the toxins that we've created in labs in industry now that go into clothing and all the things that we wear and eat and are exposed to. So the immune system is an inflammatory process, right? And the inflammation is what is driving most symptoms, right? If there's inflammation of the brain, you've got brain fog and forgetfulness and irritability. Let me phrase that. I don't want to say you. If a person has, right?
I get it. Yes.
I'm very careful with my language, right? If a person has inflammation of the brain, then they have brain fog and irritability and mood disorders and forgetfulness and things like that. If they have irritation in the colon, it can create one thing. If they have irritation in the joints and the heart and the blood vessels. So symptoms are typically some form of inflammation. The inflammation is the immune system. And then our job is to figure out, well, what is the immune system responding to? Do I need to help it get that out in a way that it seems to be unable to? It's trying to get it out with the inflammation. It can't, and it's just stuck in this idea. Well, I couldn't get it out. I couldn't get the mycotoxins out of the arteries. I'll just try harder. And it gets more and more and more inflamed, and then the person gets atherosclerosis and has a heart attack, right? So sometimes, rarely, the body is very, very, very smart. Sometimes it gets a little stubborn and keeps, because if that's the only thing it knows to do, sometimes it'll just keep doing more, right? So we want to figure out, well, this inflammation, what's triggering it? This symptom is inflammation, typically. What's triggering it? Does the body have a good way of handling that? Does it need a little help? Did it get stuck in a pattern of hypersensitivity, right? There's 4 hypersensitivity reactions, and they're associated with, TH1, 2, 17, and the complements and all these things. So there's 4 basic hypersensitivities. Did the body get hypersensitive? Meaning, yes, it's not great to have pollen there in the body, but no, it's not worth giving asthma over, right? You're overreacting. And so then how do we go and how do we have a conversation with the immune system about that?
So very good explanation of that. The testing that you mentioned, just that there may not be the best testing. There is hair. Obviously, you can do hair testing. You can do blood. You can do urine. You can do. I'm not sure what other ones you could probably do, but is there a test for heavy metals that you feel is actually worthwhile?
So I'll answer that, but I'll answer it from a larger perspective. I'll take every test I can get when looking at a client.
Yeah,
Give it all to me. Let me see your blood, your chemistry panel, your CBC. Let me see ultrasounds. If you got a CAT scan, we'll get a radiologist to interpret that. If you've got someone did EAV in your meridians, let's take a look at that. You've got a 20 page, did you do a symptom questionnaire? Do you have a stool test? The more the merrier. I mean, it's hard as a clinician because, you say that and then you get, 2 hours worth of reading back from some clients.
exactly.
Right. Right. But yes, the more the merrier, assuming it's decent. Tests have their limitations. Even the same test to the same lab will have a variation. You send 3 blood samples the same day to the same lab, you're going to get variations. So understand that labs are run by humans. Humans make mistakes. Different labs have different methods, so you can't necessarily compare one lab to another. For metals, like if you do hair, mercury will give you false negatives because it can do the organic versus the methyl forms. You can if you're going to do metals, and so all of that, yes, lots of testing, but what makes sense from the patient's financial standpoint to do? Are we going to get the
Sure.
best bang
Yes.
for the buck? And sometimes the best test is the therapy. Like if you look on the bottle, the FDA makes you say not for the treatment or diagnosis. Why? Because you can trial by fire. If you give somebody something that chelates out metals and suddenly their vision improves, their tinnitus goes away, and they're sleeping better, was that a diagnostic for metal toxicity? Well, it could also be blood circuit. It could also be, um, maybe there was the magnesium in the EDTA. Maybe you're making the blood a little thinner by pulling out some calcium, but you got some information there, right? So you can
Sure.
use, if you have a good product, it will give you diagnostic information. The manufacturer can't say it, but as a clinician, you're like, I gave you something for histamine. Your symptom went away or got 80% better. Histamine. I don't need a test now. Histamine,
Right.
right? But in terms of more specific to your question for metals, I like urine challenge tests. Now,
Sure.
the
Yes.
caveat with that is, what are you using as a challenge, right? Because if you're using EDTA, well, that's fine for hard metals, but it doesn't really do the soft metals. So then you give someone an EDTA challenge and they're like, yeah, I don't really see that much mercury. Well, but EDTA doesn't really pull out mercury. Okay. Or you give someone a DMPS or a DMSA challenge and they're like, yeah, I don't see that much aluminum. It doesn't pull out aluminum. Right. So that's the weak spot we're seeing with these challenges that they don't understand that there's different kinds of metals that require different chelators to challenge properly. And,
Exactly.
and then here's another one. It's like, ask the labs. It's like, how are you preparing the sample? Because they can't see a chelated metal. They need the metal typically to be a free metal. So they have to break the chelator from the metal. So they'll do an acid wash of some kind, split the metal off in the urine, measure it. But if you've got a chelator that's really, really strong, like DOTA, which is great because it hangs on the body, it doesn't redistribute that much. Can the lab even break that up? Are they thinking, well, our protocol is to mix with hydrochloric acid at this percent, and we're going to get readings? Okay, well, did you validate that for all of the chelators that are out there now, or just the ones that you're comfortable or prepared to test for? So, what I would say is, you're not necessarily going to get false positives when you do these tests. If you see a metal, it's there, right?
Yeah.
But
Right.
you can get false negatives.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's always been my understanding too. That great, do the test. I'm with you. I like to see labs. I love labs, but I also know their limitations, and so especially with things like the heavy metals. If I'm getting a liver enzyme test, for the most part, I'm going to trust what I'm getting there. But when I'm looking at heavy metals, once again, there's so many different factors that are involved in that. So I think I take the same type of approach. When it comes to detox, I think everybody needs a little detox every now and then because we live in a toxic world. If everybody probably needs a parasite cleanse once a year because you're probably going to get exposed to parasites, especially if you got house pets and things like that. So there's just certain things that people just need to do as part of their spring cleaning.
Yeah, the only time I really push for testing is if someone has some kind of exposure, like they've had 5 or 10 MRIs with contrast agent and they're loaded with gadolinium,
Yeah. Yep.
right? Or they've been eating tuna fish out of a can for lunch for the last 20 years and they're full of mercury. If there's, or they've been drinking well water that's tested really high, yeah, sometimes I do want a baseline for some of these people. But if not, we're still going to chelate, and then
Yeah.
see how
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
feel.
Yeah. Well, and that addresses, another aspect of that, which is, taking care of those upstream sources that are creating some of this toxicity. Maybe you've got, I had a client with 14 amalgams in her mouth. There's no way that this person is getting out of life without mercury toxicity in her brain if she's got 14 amalgams, right? I've got people who they did uh, worked with welding for their entire life. They're definitely going to have exposure. So if you can get rid of those upstream sources, otherwise you're going to be just you know, toxifying yourself exactly the same way over and over again. So that's another thing we have to clarify is getting rid of those upstream sources,
Mm, yeah.
which is tough sometimes because that's may just be part of their life that they can't get rid of. Um, let's do a little bit of a deeper dive into the specifics between the chelators and the binders. There's a whole list of things. I know you probably have your favorites, and the ones that are going to work the best with certain things. You talk a lot about the soft and the hard metals, and the need to have very very specific types of chelators. But you also layer those, don't you? You give stuff for soft and stuff for hard as a layered effect. Am I saying that correctly for you?
Sure. So um, I talk about soft and hard metals because I want people to understand at a clinical level the differences behind how these play out. However, in 98% of the time, people are going to have both in them. So you need a protocol that works for both. But to try to explain this, you can't grab a fistful of water, right? Water is soft, your hand has form, you can't grab it, right? So if a metal is soft, and that means its electron shell is wider and it's kind of more flexible, then you need a chelator that matches that. You need a soft chelator for a soft metal, right? So mercury is a soft metal. So you're typically going to get the sulfur groups, right? So that would be DMPS, DMSA, alpha lipoic acid. Those are soft chelators. They work on a soft metal. Okay. And then you've got the hard metals. These are more, if you look at them atomically, their electrons are, cloud is tighter. They're, and the way that plays out is, it's a harder metal. Like iron is hard, aluminum is hard, right? And so for a hard metal, you need a hard chelator, which is, a different than sulfur, right? Now, if you use a soft chelator like alpha lipoic acid on a hard metal like gadolinium, that's the mess because it can grab it, but it won't hold on to it. And then you get these people and then it redistributes, right? Um, so you want to match the right chelator to the right metal. But since by and large, people have both of them in them, you do both at the same time. The exception to that is with gadolinium. If you've got someone with gadolinium poisoning, which is a really horrific disease to have, gadolinium deposition disease, you want to stay away from the soft chelators and just focus on the hard ones, unless they've got massive amounts of mercury, which boy, that's a complex case. So I teach about the hard and soft metals so that for specific cases like gadolinium, you understand what to do. Now, you mentioned the work of Andy Cutler, and
Yes.
great man, and he found some great hacks for the limitations of the chelators that were available to him at a time, right? So He was a fan of alpha lipoic acid, which is a very small sulfur-based chelator, and it'll, go into the brain. The problem is it's very weak. So as a rule, you could put chelators on a spectrum. So we have the hard and the soft metals, right? And borderline if you even metals if you want to get into the woods, but hard and soft. And then you've got how the chelator itself is going to be on a spectrum. It can be very small and quick and agile and get into all the nooks and crannies, but that means by default it won't be very strong because the smaller it is, the less binding it has to the thing it's trying to grab onto, as a rule. Or you can have these really big chelators like DOTA. They're macrocyclic, they're rings. They chelate more slowly, but once they grab onto it, they're not letting go very easily. So, for instance, take a look at the way the body handles iron, right? The body has 3 chelators it uses in sequence to move iron. First it binds it with this, it passes it, grabs it to part A, moves it to part B, moves it to chelator C, and out it goes. And that way, each step is small enough energetically that it doesn't get lost in the sauce. It doesn't have to make the metal, if the metal has to make too large a jump from one chelator to the next, it can break free in the transition. So if you
Makes
want,
sense.
right, so look at the way the body does things. It does it in stepwise fashion where each step of the cycle is just the right size so as the relay race gets handed off properly, right? So if we're going to recreate, what I tried to do is to recreate the way the body chelates, which is stepwise from small to medium, from fast small to an intermediate to a slow large stable chelator, right? That's nature showed that, so I recreated that to the best I could. So as an example, alpha lipoic acid is the fast, weak one. And if you just use it, it's going to redistribute. So
Okay.
back to Andy Cutler, what Andy Cutler said is, well, if we have enough of it in there, even if it lets go of one alpha lipoic acid, it'll grab onto another. So that's why he said, I'll dose on the half-life, I'll dose every 4 hours. You'll always have it in your body. And then you'll have one redistribution event when you stop and take a break after X number of days. Okay. I think a more sophisticated understanding, and I'm not, all respect to Dr. Cutler. The man was a genius.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. But technology's advanced, new ideas come into play. So I think that if we recreate what the body does, we say, okay, I'm going to give a small, fast, agile chelator. So let's say I'm trying to remove aluminum from someone, right? And it's crystallized, right? It's formed little crystals. So I'm going to want a very nimble, fast chelator like a citrate to go and pull it out of the crystal form, right? But it's not strong, so then it's going to pass it off to something of medium strength like EDTA, right? And then the EDTA is going to pass it on to something really strong like DOTA, and then it urinates out. And so I've minimized the risk of redistribution by making sure that the relay that I'm doing, right? Like if you were a coach for a cross country team, you would want to make sure that the relay people had the ability, the one wasn't so slow that they couldn't catch the, you had to time them, right? They have to be reasonably close together. Like you can't get the really fast relay race person maybe to hand it off to the slow guy who's the marathon runner. Maybe there's a mismatch there. So we want to make sure that at each stage of the relay, there's no redistribution. So for hard metals, I would do citrate, EDTA, DOTA, or our products metacardium and Captamet. Now for a soft metal, you could do something, and a meramide, if you can get it from Boyd, is great. You would do something like alpha lipoic acid, followed by something like MIA DMSA, which I like to think is a better form of DMSA. It's a little more, it's an advanced form of DMSA, which is an artesunate product. And then you could, sometimes you can then pass it off to the same DOTA again. It can still grab onto those. If you just give the strong chelators, the slow, big, strong ones, you don't redistribute, but you take longer than you need to because it can't get into the crystals and the nooks and crannies so quickly. And if you just use the quick ones, you get redistribution. So I'd rather just use the big strong ones if I'm only going to pick one and be slower but safer. But we have a protocol on our website where we do them all, right? And we get this whole little coordinated system going through in the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I've seen your protocol. I like that. Give me a breakdown, a list. So the slow, right? The alpha lipoic acid, and this is S alpha lipoic acid, correct? Um, S alpha lipoic acid is one you're saying is a slow, correct?
No, no, they're fast. It's a very
Okay,
small
they're fast,
chelator.
small. So give me some examples of each of those categories. So if I'm thinking about chelators for the slow small, you said no fast small,
Fast small, right? So I mean, that's
fast
what you find
small.
in nature, right? Citric acid, malic acid, um, all of the, all of the acids that you're finding in fruits. Those are all mild chelators.
So like modified citrus pectin
Oh no,
is.
that's a binder, right? That's grabbing onto it.
Now I've read papers that talk about it as a binder and as a chelator. So what's the confusion there?
Um,
Same thing with zeolite. I've read also papers that talk about it as a chelator and as a binder in the same
right,
breath.
right. So binder would I would say is the appropriate term. Chelator is a very specific chemical meaning. So you could say it is chelation. You could say that a chelator is a binder. So all chelators you could say are binders, but not all binders are chelat. It has to do partially. Are we talking about absorption? Are we talking about a guest molecule? There's a lot of ways there's a lot of ways chemical compounds can stick. One compound can stick to another,
Sure,
right? The binder can create planar sheets and it can get stuck in between the sheets. They can be cages. It can be stuck on the outside electrostatically. It can be um, adsorbed or adsorbed is like on the surface. Absorbed is pulled inside. So there's a lot of different ways in which chemicals can be removed. As a general rule, I would say chelation would be appropriate for things that bind metals um, with the little claws that grab on. Now,
now,
if
is it
binders are
also a
pretty
matter of where they take place? Because traditionally, when you think about defining a chelator versus a binder, one of the definitions that's in that is where is its action taking place. If it's a binder, they're saying the action is taking place in the gut. If it's a
sure.
chelator, the action is taking place in the blood, right?
Yes and no, right? You could argue, sure, I would accept that a binder takes place in the gastrointestinal tract, or in the skin or the sinuses or any surface you can get to. However, chelation would really be metals specifically. I wouldn't say that we would ever chelate a chemical.
Right. So I guess what I'm trying to assess here is the reasoning for why we'll just use modified citrus pectin. Um, the reason why maybe it's being referred to sometimes as a chelator is because it's having an action in the blood, not because it's actually chelating a metal, like you're saying, but because its action is taking place in the blood. Therefore, they're calling it a chelator because of that.
Well, does modified citrus pectin pass the intestinal tract and get into the bloodstream?
It's my understanding that it does.
I'd be surprised if that actually does
Yeah.
that.
I know the protocol is 5 grams 3 times a day, uh, and that the action, from my understanding of it, and I have not read enough of it to be completely uh, accurate with this, was that it was affecting stuff in the blood, not just in the gut,
Hang
like
on.
pectosol.
Let's find out. Gotta love AI. All right, so we're gonna look it up right now. Okay, it says yes, but with nuances. Um, allows a small esterification, allows it to enter the small intestine into circulation. I stand corrected. Um, okay, so some of it can get in there. Fascinating. Okay, great.
And see that's why I think they're calling it binder and chelator both, right? Because it's kind of
Right, but
it's
it
making an
wouldn't.
action.
Yes, but chelation is a very specific chemical reaction that would
I
not be
get what you're
present.
saying. Yeah, I get what you're saying. They're using kind of a location definition to call it chelator. You're
Sure.
using the chemical reaction definition to say no chelation
But you
effect
could say
because of
it's a
that.
metal bond. You could say it could be binding metals. Now, the
Yeah.
question is, how many metals are going to be free floating in the bloodstream that it has access to if you
Right.
don't coax it? Okay, so if the metal is one of the ways metals become toxic is because the body misconstrues them for nutritional elements. Cadmium for zinc, aluminum, manganese, selenium, mercury, so forth and so on, right? Lead for calcium. And so these metals, the body pulls them in and incorporates them into the tissue and then can't get rid of them because even though they were close in size, they're not exactly, and the charge is off, and now they're just gluing up the system. That's the first problem. The second problem is they're often catalytic. So what I mean by that is think of the catalytic converter in your car, right? It's taking some of the waste gases and changing them. But the catalytic, what the definition of a catalyst is something that it itself is not changed by what it does. So if I light a match to to light a fire, the match is consumed in the action of lighting it, right? It's not a catalyst in a sense because it's gone afterwards, right? However, their metals can light fires without becoming consumed. So the thing about a catalyst is even a small amount, it never stops working. So when we get metals in our body, they have catalytic reactions in the body that never end. Now, one of the things that we can associate with the beginning of the heart attack, the rise in heart attacks and heart disease in the last century was when they figured out that they could take cheap oil like cottonseed oil and bubble it with nickel and hydrogenate it, which so the nickel, the metal was a catalyst. It turned the cheap oil into like something solid and people could fry with it and it was cheap. The problem is it also incorporates itself into the fats of the body, and that's terrible fat. So
Yep.
it's not just about eating Crisco. If you have metals in your body, you internally generate in situ, you make Crisco out of your own body. You're hydrogenating your own internal fats. So the risk of the metals is they get in, they can't get out very easily, and they continuously generate problems. Now, will a citrus pectin be able to pull lead out of a bone? Will it be able to, because it's right now, granted, if there's some free floating lead, yes, it'll bind to it. Not chelate it, but it'll bind to it, right?
Right.
But that's not where most of the metals are, right? Most of the metals are incorporated into the tissue, and you need something that has a stronger affinity for the metal than the tissue does. So a chelator is something where it has a stronger pull for a metal than the body does, and it's able to rip that metal out and take it.
Yeah, its affinity is greater. Yeah. So, I mean, I think from what my understanding with MCP would be to use it as part of a layered effect, like we talk about, so that you have other things that are pulling stronger to get it out, get it free floating in the blood, essentially. Not free floating, hopefully, but passing it off and having that there as part of the relay to get it out of the body, I guess.
I would say that you could use the citrus pectin while you're chelating as like a
Right.
mop-up, like a sort of like a background running defense. Like, oh wait, that got away. Let's grab onto that because again, I don't think it's gonna it when you chelate. If a person chelates improperly, there will be free floating metals, right? Because they're redistributing. So
Right.
then in that place, yes, the citrus pectin makes sense.
Very good. So back to my original question, which was to then create a kind of a list. So if we think about all the different things, we've got EDTA, we got DMSA, we got the DOTA, we got the ALA. What else would we have? Zeolite, I guess you
I'll
could
make
put
it
in
very
there.
simple for you.
Yeah.
Oh, real easy. Okay. So most of the chelators that are used that we've known for 70 years, DMPS, DMSA, EDTA, I would call these the intermediary chelators, right? They're the handoff chelators. They're linear, meaning they're like strings, which means they can be flexible and move into places. So a chelator that's a string wraps around a metal, and that's a relatively quick reaction. The quickest reaction is something that's really tiny, just one little piece goes and grabs it, right? That would be alpha lipoic acid and all the acids, right? The simple acids, right? Lactic acid from exercise, things like this. And then all the ones that are little strings, if they're strings, these are the middle chelators. That would be like DTPA, EDTA, things like this. The really strong heavy chelators are a new class of chelators most people are unfamiliar with. They're called macrocyclics. They're rings, and they're extremely stable, but they're slower. And as far as I know, there's only two that are in the marketplace right now, and they're both ones that we've invented. Well, hang on. I didn't invent DOTA. So DOTA is a water-soluble, very large hard metal chelator.
Okay.
It can bind to soft metals. I've seen it do it. I don't necessarily think that that's its strong point, but it does, right? I would rather someone took amaramide for mercury, but I've seen DOTA grab mercury just fine.
And
But
that's
it's
Captamet,
stronger.
correct?
What's
That's
that?
Captamet?
Yeah, Captain.
Yeah, very good.
So that's the only macrocyclic, slow, strong chelator on the planet, as far as I know right now. There's another one we're coming out with at the end of this month. It took a year and a half to get the chemistry figured out how to make it. And what I did is I said, okay, we can get the hard metals out of the bloodstream, out of the water soluble places, and I can get the soft metals out from inside with MIA DMSA, which is DMSA, but the next generation. It's got another methyl group on it. It makes it, it's just one step better than DMSA. But how do we get the hard metals out that have gotten inside the brain? That means we have to pass the blood-brain barrier. That means we have to pass by the lipid membrane. And the problem is a soft metal chelator can get in there because the nature of its size and shape and charge allow it to go to places where the soft metals are. But the nature of a hard metal chelator is such that it's not going to go there. And that's why we've had trouble, with things like aluminum and gadolinium, because they get in the brain and you can never get them out. I mean, yes, if you take it out of the bloodstream, eventually osmotically it'll start equalizing. That's a very slow path. So what I said is, okay, I really want to get the Captamet. I really want to get the DOTA in the brain because I want to get the aluminum out. I want to get the gadolinium out. Look at all the Alzheimer's associated with aluminum, and all the aluminum is usually the number one toxic metal people have in them. So, okay, how do we do that? Well, I want to get the DOTA into the brain, but I can't because it's not water soluble. And then I thought, well, what makes something water soluble? And, methylation, I'm sorry, what makes something, back up. I want to get in the brain, but it's water soluble. I have to make it fat soluble. Now, you know what about methylation and people that say they have methylation defects?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Do you know what methylation does?
It takes off is it taking off a group? Or is
I
it
think methylation puts a methyl group on, but hang
I
on.
was just going to say, I was just going to ask you, is it taking off or putting on? Because I knew it was one of those. So you probably know better than me.
Oh, I hope I'm not embarrassing myself here, but I think methylation, I'm pretty sure methylation is you put a methyl group on. Well, why would you want to do that? Because now it's fat soluble. So like methylated B vitamins, right? Coenzymated B vitamins.
Right.
Now the B vitamins are fat soluble. They can go where they need to go. So the body has a process of making water soluble things fat soluble so they can, because a fat soluble thing cannot, without active transport, it can't get inside of a cell, right? It needs to be fat soluble across the membrane. So the body has a path that's called methylation for making things fat soluble. I'm like, well, if that's how the body does it, can we methylate DOTA? And a year and a half later, the answer is yes, you can.
Yeah.
So we have, and that's the Velamet product. So we've methylated the DOTA. We put a ring of methyl groups on it. Now the body says, oh, this is fat soluble. Let's bring this into the brain. Let's get this into the tissue. And then the methyl groups, so we have the ability to methylate, and we have the ability to remove methyl groups, right? There's enzymes that put them on and enzymes that take them off. So the idea is once it gets in, the methyl groups get removed and it becomes DOTA again, but this time it's inside the brain. Now it can grab onto all this stuff, and then getting out of the brain is a lot easier than getting into it, right? So
Yeah,
now it can leave the body. And if you want, we can talk about how the toxins actually get out of the brain, or we could for
no, absolutely. I think that's a good segue from where you are now. I mean, alpha lipoic acid is the one that we've traditionally used to go into the brain to try to mobilize
for soft metals, but until now, no one there has never been a way that doesn't cause horrible side effects to get hard metals out of the brain. There are some hard metal chelators for aluminum and such that are out there, and boy, they have nasty side effects, right? So I believe we've come up with the first, I believe that methylated DOTA is the world's first effective hard, fat-soluble hard metal chelator.
And explain, so the methylated allows it to cross the blood-brain barrier. What is it inside the brain then that you know is going to remove the methyl group?
There's just enzymes, and that's their job, is to take methyl groups off. They're expressed in most tissues.
Okay, so that it's just a natural process of of taking the methyl group off. Okay. Go into the getting stuff out of the brain. But here's something also I want to throw into this. My understanding is that mercury toxicity is kind of primary. And what I mean by that is that if you have high levels of mercury, it can, I don't know if prevent is the best way to say it, but it can prevent or reduce your body's ability to detox other metals. So your ability to detox other metals is influenced by the level of mercury toxicity that the tissue has.
That doesn't mean that if you take something like a chelator, that it's going to make the chelator less effective. So it doesn't mean you have to do mercury first before any other chelation will work. What it means is that mercury, along with a lot of other metals, but mercury is one of the nastier ones, will interfere with so many of the enzymes that the natural pathway, the natural metallic ions, and the natural pathway out is compromised. But
Gotcha. Okay.
right, but we're not going the natural. We're saying, hey, the body's done as much as it can. It was never designed for this level of detox. I mean, the body was designed for the little bit of arsenic, you get from eating rice and drinking well water, and just, maybe as a hunter-gatherer, right? Not these industrial level exposures. So, we have to, unfortunately, have to fight fire with fire. The problem is created in a lab. The solution is likely going to be in a lab too.
Gotcha. Excellent. Okay. So tell me about getting it out of the brain.
Right. Okay. So the way the brain works is we used to think that the brain would detoxify. The brain detoxification pathway is called the glymphatics, like lymphatic, but with a G. And we used to think that there were some spots on the top of the brain and it kind of made this fountain-like effect. We now know that 80%-ish, 70, 80% of the detox of the metabolic normal toxins of the brain, right? Just every cell eats, every cell goes to the bathroom, it goes to the bathroom into the lymphatics, and then it gets out the body, right? That's the sewage system or the drainage system. Brain has one too. Turns out 70, 80% of that is through the sinuses. Yeah, interesting. There's at the top of the sinuses, there's something called the cribriform plate, which is where the very thin, weak spot in the brain and the spot in the skull. Oh, as a chiropractor.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right. If you ever do the binasal specific with the balloon, you crack and move over with the sphenoid. Okay. So the olfactory nerves go through this, so it's a porous structure, and it goes then they go right to the amygdala because if you smell the scent of a saber-toothed tiger as a hunter-gatherer, you need to run before you even know what you're doing. It's like you need to have that instant reaction. So it bypasses all of your thought processes. If you smell something dangerous, your body reacts immediately.
Yeah. Limbic system and smell are
boom go. Right. Boom go. It's bad. Yeah. Danger go. Right. Okay. So that's right. That's how the brain is designed. That's why that pathway is there anatomically. And through the same holes, the same that the nerves go up, the toxins come down. And right. The problem is if someone has a sinus issue, which many people have without knowing it, then the biofilms that form in there make it so the toxins can't get out of the brain at night. And so the toxins start to build up. Like everybody gets Alzheimer's gets plaque in their brain all the time, right? It happens all day long. But each night you get rid of it. Make the plaque, you get rid of it. The plaque is the theory that I subscribe to for plaque is they're like the neutrophil nets that the white blood cells make. When the white blood cells last ditch effort, they'll explode and cast their DNA out like a giant net around an infection. So I believe, I follow the theory that the plaque in the brain is a netting phenomena to grab onto infectious materials coming up from the sinuses, because the brain is not sterile. No place is, right? Grabs onto it, and then at night we flush all this stuff out. But
Interesting.
if you've got a biofilm infection up there, which lots of people do, or if it's swollen or inflamed, then the toxins can't get out. So they build up, they build up, they build up, and then the person goes, "Oh, look at that! There's plaque in the brain." Like, well, no. What you have is a failure to remove the plaque in the brain. The plaque is, not. It is a process of the brain's natural detox pathways to make a little bit of plaque, grab on, and dump it out. It's just part of the detox pathway. It's just obviously if you've got a bunch in the brain, it means you're making more. And why are you doing that? Then you can get rid of it. And why did that happen? So most homes are full of mold. And the reason, and I'll walk you to how these connect, right? Um, Most homes are full of mold, and the reason is because of the way in which we build houses, right? We got into this kick of making homes super energy efficient with vapor barriers and the vapor barrier means that the humidity can't get out, or if there's a leak somewhere, it can't. Right? Old homes used to be made of relatively porous materials and were lye plaster, which is antimicrobial because of the high pH, so mold wouldn't grow as much. And modern homes, the mold gets in and it eats the paper on the back of the drywall and it eats the cheap cellulose insulation. So you got all this mold inside of a house. Now, part two, the average human dumps 2 pounds of skin flakes every year into their environment. That gets up into the HVAC system. In the HVAC system, right after the dehumidifier, right after the AC, if you watch an air conditioner, you see it's constantly dripping. Part of the process of cooling is it generates a degree of humidity. So now you've got this dripping effect in the HVAC. The HVAC is damp, it's dark, and it's got pounds of human skin in it. And mold and bacteria grow in that, learning how to eat humans because it's human skin. And then that stuff blows all day long into the house. So most houses, because of HVAC systems and because of the manufacturing way houses are made, have levels of mold. I have yet to find a house that maybe one, and it might be the only house in the country. It was a $900,000 construction made for people specifically to the principles of how not to do this. I have yet to find a single home that I've tested, and I've got a state-of-the-art tester for this, that didn't have mold at extremely high levels inside, meaning it's growing. Now, the mold and the bacteria get in the air. They get in the sinuses. The sinus is the HVAC of the body, right? It gets up in there. And if you get mold and bacteria at the same time, they fight. They're ancient enemies. And they make chemicals to attack each other. Antibiotics come from mold, right? Antifungals come from bacteria. So they're making these chemicals, and we get caught in the crossfire. And the bacteria get in and they make a biofilm at the cribriform plate, so the toxins can't get out as easily. And that biofilm is constantly secreting these chemicals to fight the mold. And those toxins get up in the brain, and now it's a mess. And that's what happens with the brain issue. You have to work on the sinuses. The sinuses have a completely unreasonably large effect on the immune system and on the brain and on the mood. When I first got into this, I had no idea what a sleeping giant the sinuses were in people's health.
Yeah, it's from what you're telling me here. I mean, and a lot of this is a surprise for me as well. It sounds like we should all be using biofilm busters as part of this process as well.
So there are 3 things you want to do for the sinuses. And as a quick aside, how do I say this? All right. You might not think you have a sinus problem, right? But we're all adults here. As a man should wake up with an erection every morning, right? And that's coming partially from nitric oxide. One of the main places that comes from is your sinuses, right? So when guys are saying like, hey, I don't really seem like I've got the sexual vigor I had when I was younger, look to your sinuses, right? Look,
Interesting.
yeah,
Interesting.
surprise, surprise, right? We know that people with sinus infections have their risks of Depression and anxiety go through the roof. Have mood disorders? Look at the sinuses. What the sinuses are supposed to do, make nitric oxide so the lungs open up, so the heart stays happy, so you get erections, all these things you want for your life, right? And for women, women get erections too. It just happens internally rather than externally, right? It's an inverted bit of erectile tissue. So same thing, as a woman, you're finding that your sex life isn't as enjoyable as it was when you were younger. Look to the sinuses, oddly. Okay, so what the sinuses are supposed to do is make nitric oxide, and they're also supposed to generate a series of neurotransmitters. They're supposed to help you with GABA and dopamine and serotonin and all of these things that the serotonin makes you satisfied with what you've got. The dopamine makes you looking forward to what you're going to get. And the GABA helps you relax at the end of the day and be kind of peaceful and no anxiety. So in a healthy sinus, all of these happy chemicals are being made and people will say, oh, well, they're being made in such tiny amounts. I'm like, yes, they are. But location, location, location. They're right by the cribriform plate. They go right up. The body is meant to be sampling that stuff. And it goes right up to the amygdala, to the fear centers. It goes to the pituitary. It goes to the hypothalamus and the frontal lobes. So a lot of mood is actually controlled by the sinuses.
Interesting. Interesting. This is good stuff. Yeah.
So what you want to do, from what I've got so far, I've got it down to a 3-part protocol. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get in there and we want to break up the biofilms and absorb the toxins. Now you might say, oh, well, I rinse my sinuses out and that's all. Like, okay, great. If you're rinsing it out with salt water, then you're getting rid of things that are water soluble. What do we know about detox? What's the real problem in detox?
Yeah, the fat soluble.
Fat soluble stuff that sticks to the membranes. So yes, rinse your sinuses out with, it's great to get all those the water soluble stuff and the pollen and yada, yada, but you're not going to get out the fat soluble stuff. Do you know what they give to people that have really intense sinus infections in the ER? Or, the typical will do that in ENTs. They'll give them baby shampoo in a sinus rinse.
Interesting.
Why are they doing that? They say they're busting the biofilm. Yes, but what they don't know that they're doing is they're getting rid of the fat-soluble toxins. And what are the fat-soluble toxins? Well, the exo and endotoxins from bacteria, right? And the mycotoxins from mold. They're fat-soluble. What else is fat-soluble? All the eicosanoids, all the inflammatory elements that are up there. So you get all these fat-soluble, you get the infections, they go to war with each other. They create these fat-soluble toxins that inflame everything that you can't get out by rinsing, right? Because they're fat-soluble, which then create a series of inflammatory chemicals, which create the inflammation, which is then the symptom, and you can't get rid of those either because they're also, half of them, the more important half, the eicosanoids, are fat-soluble, which is why that soap works. But the soap's nasty. So what you need to do is you need to figure out what's the right soap, quote unquote, right? So one of the products that I have now is a nasal spray, or it'll be ready shortly, where it goes, and the idea is to break up the biofilm, so you have that, but also to grab the fat-soluble toxins and the fat-soluble inflammatory compounds and get them out.
Hey there. I wanted to take a second to thank you for tuning into these episodes. And I also wanted to ask if you would take a moment and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, subscribe to these services. And I wanted to also show you my website. Now, granted, this website is still under construction, but you can find my link tree here on this website. And with this link tree, you can go to everything that I do. You've got YouTube, Spotify, Rumble. You've got my Substack writings if you want to read those, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Please follow me on all these different platforms and subscribe to, once again, YouTube, etc. This really helps to support the things that I do and allows me to continue doing these things. So if you feel like you're getting a lot out of these, which I hope you do, because I know I do, please take a moment to do those things. And once again, I appreciate you. I'll see you on the flip side.
And Boy, I felt like $1 million when I started doing that. The second thing you want to do is you want to work on the neuroimmune side of things, right? The sinuses are an incredible lever that controls the immune system and the brain, right? So if if you've got, I'll give you an example. I started with the second spray I did. I was working on giving the brain and the immune system the signal that a healthy sinus would give it. And again, it's like my mood changed really, and each of the ingredients I put in there had a different effect on my mood. Like one made me feel calm, one made me feel kind of like smarter and more focused. One just made me feel, I don't even know words for these things. And when I stuck them all together, I was just on cloud nine, which is, I suppose, how you're supposed to feel normally. Anyway, so I started taking these things, um, and my chess game started getting better. So my IQ was going up. Um, and it was almost like I was trying to describe this. It's like with one of them, it almost felt like, when you sniff peppermint, this is the first one, and you get that cold feeling. Well, the first spray, I sniffed it and I was like, wow, it feels like peppermint, like my lungs and my sinuses. Like all day long, it felt like cold inside. And what I realized was I had opened up parts of my lungs and my sinuses that had been closed for so long that they just never got air. And when they finally got in, my body was like, "What's this? This is air. This is weird," and it wasn't used to it. So right, so we want to bind to all these toxins. We want to get them out. Then we want to get the immune system. We want to normalize the immune system. And I'll give you another example, something weird that happened. Um, I went out to dinner with a friend that I hadn't seen in a while, and I avoid foods I'm allergic to. But this time it looked really good on the menu. And I'm like, oh, all right, I'll pay for it, but whatever. I want to enjoy the meal. Right. And I had it. And then, 20 minutes later, I'm like, oh, my stomach didn't feel good. And my sinus were a little clogged and my mood was off and my muscles felt a little sore. I'm like, wait a minute, sinuses? And I had the spray in my pocket. So I sniffed it. 5 minutes later, my food allergies were gone. That was it. It was like I never even had the dinner.
Wow.
Now, then I was a smart ass, and I did it again, and I said, well, how about for dairy? So I had a pizza, and no, I still got nailed. So, all right. It made it better, but I was still nailed. So what I would say is, it's like, no, this is not going to be like a corticosteroid where, you're not going to have any allergic reactions, but for like mild ones, at least for me, for that, for the food that I had, that I just had something I shouldn't eat, it was gone. And I'm
Now,
like,
this is not something that it's ready on the market yet. This is something that's still in
oh, it
process.
takes me like 2 weeks. We're just making the labels and getting them going into production
Because I
now.
know you have, is it, starts with a Z, Zoibin?
Joyben.
I knew that's a
I wouldn't put
biofuel.
that up in the sinuses. That's
Yeah,
good.
no, I wasn't sure if that was where you were going with that or not. Okay.
Right. I mean, I've got the two trial versions of it here, and yeah. So give me a moment. Oh, so nice. So it's a strange effect. It's like being peaceful and focused at the same time. Yeah, I usually only get one at a time. Anyway, so then the third thing you want to do is, all right, so you get rid of you want to clear out the biofilms and the infections, and you want to get rid of all the inflammatory markers, and you want to give the brain the signal that it should be getting from the sinuses, if the sinus were healthy. Long term, you want to get the good bacteria back in there, right? And that's like Staphylococcus epidermis and some other more strangely sounding bacterial names. The thing is, the sinuses, so the average person by the time they're 20, according to AI, has had 17 rounds of antibiotics, which I find incredulous, but okay. And so now the gut has a place to reseed itself from. It's the appendix, right? So the appendix is an interstitial organ. It's a backup reboot of your gut microbiome.
Right.
I don't think we have an appendix in the nose. So when the sinus microbiome goes, it doesn't have a way to reboot itself so easily. And it takes 3 to 6 months to get the good bacteria back in from the environment, even if you wipe all the bad stuff out. But the moment you go back into a house, unless you treat it properly, and we could talk about the fogger system that we've created for working on a house and how to do that. it's gonna reinfect. So I wanted to get those three bacteria for the sinuses, and nobody makes them. So I said, I'll make them. So we have a product coming out that will have the three native bacteria for the sinuses. And then, uh, for research purposes only, I personally will be putting it up my nose to reset my nasal sinuses. What you choose to do is your choice.
Your own guinea pig.
Yeah, well, it's like I'm not going to make any claims other than simply say these are the three bacteria that are found in a healthy sinus in a bottle. What you do with them is your choice.
So that's a fascinating branch that you went off on there with the sinuses. This is gonna be something going through my brain now for quite a while. I'm gonna have to do some deep dive into this. This is really fascinating. Um, it sounds like it's a missing link for a lot of things.
Yeah, yeah. I like to think I'm in pretty good shape, right? I like to think I'm pretty healthy. And I took these and I was like, wow, I, yes, it's something that and I suspect a lot of practitioners kind of gloss over. I'm like, oh, the sinuses, they'll regulate themselves. You get a sinus infection once in a while, you blow your nose. But the connection between the brain and the immune system and mood and mold, it's just, it's one of the more important systems to fix. I'm starting to realize, and it's kind of ignored.
Well, and I'm sure you'll agree with this. There's so many rabbit holes, especially when it comes to health, when it comes to trying to correct imbalances and problems. There's so many different things to look at. It becomes very complicated, and you don't, and it's different for everybody. Sometimes, what one person's magic combination is different
Sure.
from the next person's magic combination. So, uh, this sounds like this is going to be a groundbreaker, though, for your company.
I think it's a game changer for a lot of people. I think the way I would phrase the sinuses is I would say they are the microbiome for the brain.
I like that.
Everything that the microbiome does, that the gut microbiome does for the general body, the sinuses is a small version of that for the brain. And the brain, because the brain has even though it's only 2 pounds, it has it uses 20% of the glucose, and it has an enormous effect on your life. So yeah.
Yeah, fascinating, fascinating. Well, let's go back to a topic that we were going over um, with the different chelators. And so I know you have a specific protocol. In general, how would you layer your different uh, chelators?
So I'll give you the principles involved, right? Always fix the body before the brain, because you always want to have you never want to have it. You want to have less metals in the body than the brain. That way, redistribution events are thermodynamically preferred.
Concentration gradient,
Yeah, the
right?
concentrating gradient is always pushing it out.
Right.
Osmotic pressure, right? So you always want the body to have less than the brain. Um, so body first. Secondly, when you're doing chelators, um, if you've got gadolinium, just work on that, right? I don't take any soft metal chelators and move gadolinium around. It's just too dangerous. Um, Another principle behind chelation is um, you want to have the urine at around 7.5 pH, and you can do that with citrates or malates, which turn into bicarbonates, because that makes it less likely for it to split in the urine. Remember, that's how the labs are doing it. To get the free metals, they'll hit it with acids. So you don't want the kidneys, you don't want acids in the urogenital system to be acidic, and it is for most people just by nature, because acids are dumped out of there. You're more
Mhm.
likely to get a redistribution event. So 7.5 pH when you're chelating. And then when you are doing the various relay race, right? The quick, weak, the intermediary handoff, and the slow, strong, always kind of sandwich it where you like if you were going to do it on a 5-day protocol, day 1 and 5 on every day you'll do the strong ones, and maybe just the middle days, you do the fast ones. That way you're kind of sandwiching it, right? You're making sure that I never want to see a small fast chelator alone in the body, right? I want to make sure that the
Right.
other ones are there before and after to be present for it. And I think those are the principles that'll help out a lot.
Now, curiosity for your schedule, because you go 5-2, and I don't know if this was Cutler or if it or who I'm quoting here for this. So maybe you know, uh, it was you. It was always you want your on and off schedule to be. You want your off schedule to be as long as your or longer than your on cycle was what I was always taught. And
Okay,
so,
so
like a 3-4 or a 3-10 or whatever it is.
so a lot of the rules, the 4 hour half-life, the frequency are based on avoiding redistribution, which is better avoided by having a relay system and a really strong chelator. So in terms of how often you do it, I the how often and the size of the dose, how many milligrams, and the frequency in the dose, how often, is really going to be more based on you need time off for two things. One, you have to remineralize, right? Their zinc's going to go out, their magnesium, depending, is going to go out. Especially if you use the methyl DOTA, that will definitely require staying on top of remineralization. No joke. That's a strong product. But the other thing is you don't want to overrun their kidneys, and kidneys are silent organs, right? They won't, by the time they tell you they're upset with you, you've already done damage.
Right.
So, and even if you have blood work telling you the BU and creatinine ratio and the EGFR, that's not telling you how the tubular system is doing. So we don't really test the entire kidney. So, and people who have metal toxicity, metals tend to accumulate in the kidneys, so they tend to get fibrosis of the kidneys, making them less effective. And if you have fibrosis, especially with gadolinium, you could look at the ingredients mentoflavone for that. So what I want to do is I want to chelate them. You want to go as fast as you can and no faster, and then one step slower than that, right? You want to err on the side of caution, because if you take someone too fast and you hurt their kidneys, it could be weeks or months before they build them back up with, peptides and bicarbonates and CoQ10. So you really want to be super mindful of the kidneys, even, right? So, yeah, if going at a speed of 10 wrecks them and going at a speed of 1 it takes forever and 5 is perfect, aim for 4. That way you've got a little bit of grace period, you know. So how often and how much is based on their kidney function, and
Gotcha.
that's going to be a practice, that's basically going to be a practitioner decision. Or, if you feel like if you can monitor your urine with urine urine sticks, and you see that the urine values are looking a little funky, or you're getting lower back pain, back off, slow down.
Gotcha. Gotcha. There, that made me think of a question I wanted to ask you with that. Now this is getting into the nitty gritty of actually like case study a little bit. So if you have a client who is just incredibly sensitive, okay, like you were just talking about with the nasal stuff, right? Incredibly sensitive. Just the slightest of anything just seems to create responses. It just the dosages are a tenth of what a normal person is going to use. What is it that you're thinking when you see that person, and how do you handle that type of individual? Because on the surface, it's easy to say, well, obviously this person has got a lot of toxicity, which is one of the reasons why they're so sensitive. That they're
So
so
let's walk through this.
yeah.
Let's walk through this. This is different. This is different. The everything allergy is different from multiple chemical sensitivities, right? They take anything, not even a toxin, and they get worse. This is often hypersensitive osmoreceptors, right? So what happens is, you give them something and it throws off the osmotic gradient, and that sends an alarm signal through the body. They're so hair trigger sensitive to the insults they've had that anything that comes into their body just throws them off, right? So what you're looking to do is you're looking to increase the Treg cells. You're looking to um, decrease the general inflammatory bucket principle, right? If you can get them to the point where there's just you want to give them more resilience, right? You can take a look at our autonomous product, which is adaptogens. Uh, but so if you can determine which hypersensitivity reaction you're dealing with, or which groups, is it one, two, three, or four? If you can figure out if they're Th1 or Th2 or Th17 dominant, then you can start individually crafting something for them in specific. I'm going to make
And how
this.
would you determine that?
You can do it to a degree by symptoms. Just, look up the symptoms for all these things. I mean, there are blood tests you can do. Or just get a list of all the symptoms and be like, okay, do you have here's a 2-page questionnaire. Okay, it looks like you're Th2 dominant and you've got a type 3 hypersensitivity disorder along with it, right? If you can isolate those, great, then you can individually parse them out. If you can't, you could try the nasal product, right? Because, like I said, the biggest lever you've got to pull on in the immune system is the sinuses. And what I did with the product, let me see, which if I get the name of it, it's Ventramet and Centramet. Okay, so what I did with the Centramet was I said, okay, I'm going to go after all of the hypersensitivity reactions, and I'm going to try to bring them all down, um, or normalize them all. So you may not know which one or ones it was, but if you give somebody something that brings all the hypersensitivity symptoms down and they improve, what have you discovered? Right? This was an immune problem. So the answer to your question is yes, it's a toxin problem, but if it's manifesting as an immune problem.
So like an MCAS person.
Yeah, that's part of it. Yeah. When you have a mast cell activation syndrome, yeah, that's one of the ways that plays out, right? That's the immune system is involved in inflammation. So it's an immune problem. Now, sure, vitamin D and sunshine and all sorts of other things, but um, like, you know, the first place to look at for immune balance would be the microbiome of the gut and the sinuses.
Yeah.
And then there's another one. There's a third microbiome that people don't talk about, which is the microbiome of the small intestine.
Yeah, you're right. That's not something that people even tend to get into at all.
So you're not really supposed to have very much up in the small intestine. Um, the bile, if it's moving properly, and you could look at our glytamins product for that, which is sort of like a recreation of the liver gallbladder flush, just a little easier to do. The bile is supposed to be breaking down all the bacteria and mold in the small intestine. It doesn't always do that. Some of them are a little more resistant than others. Now, there are 3 types of bacteria. Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, sure. Go for it. Yeah.
Okay, so we could say that there's 3 microbiomes of the body, and we'll leave the vagina out, which is its own microbiome. Leave that out for the moment. We'll just talk about the large intestine, the small intestine, and the sinuses. Now, the large intestine you get during childbirth and from the breast milk, right? The sinuses basically it comes from the environment. And both of those are self-perpetuating, meaning once you've got them in there, they colonize, they grow there. There's a third set, which go to the microbiome of the small intestine, that does not colonize. Now, there's a kind of bacteria that grows on the roots of plants. There's a lot of bacteria that grows in the roots of plants, right? Of those, 5% of those, the bacillus species, survive cooking and digestion. And those are the ones that become the microbiome of the small intestine. However, a couple of things. One, they don't colonize. They're there for a couple of days and they move on. Now, they do lots of great things when they're there. So what happens is you eat these spore, they survive the cooking, they survive the digestion, the bile wakes them up. And now they wake up and they populate and they colonize and they create all of their fun things that knock out the mold and do all the good things for you. And then but they don't really have the ability to grip, and eventually they leave. What it means is, unlike the large intestine and the sinuses, once you've got it dialed in, you're good. You have to keep taking these. because you don't hold on to them. And if you're Paleolithic, great, because they're on every vegetable you eat, right? All the millions of tiny little hairs are covered with these things. But we don't get them anymore. Why? Because when you put fertilizer in the soil,
Treated
then
soil.
the
Yeah.
plants don't need the bacteria as much, so they don't feed them as much because the plants are feeding the bacteria. They're exuding elements for the bacteria to live because they want their help. And if you're like, hey, plant, I'll give you everything you need, then like, well, I don't need the bacteria. So they don't feed them, so the bacteria aren't there. One. Two, when you hyper wash, the vegetables, they're gone. So they're not in the soil, they're not in the vegetables, and what's left, you peel off. So we don't get them all. So I made a product with 7 different spore forms because there are some spore bacteria out there. I've seen the spore probiotics, and there's like 3 or 4 of them. There's actually 7 that are the main ones, and they don't. Other companies don't want to give you the other 3. I don't, maybe it's difficult to manufacture. I don't know. Anyway, you take that and you got to take it every day because you're not going to hang on to it. And so when I'm looking at the immune system, I'm looking at the microbiomes. I'm looking at the large intestine, the small intestine, and the sinuses. And like I said, the small intestine and the sinuses are mostly overlooked in terms of what goes wrong. I mean, people know about SIBO and SIFO, small intestine bacterial and fungal overgrowth. They just don't know what the natural path is for how they're supposed to be handled. And they'll say, hey, well, take all these intense herbs. Okay, sure, but and yes, plants, Paleolithic plants did have a lot of elements in them that were very helpful for that, which is the whole Zoibin, and we can talk about that. And there's a microbiome that's supposed to be there. It's not supposed to be sterile.
Now the bacteria that you're talking about going through the small intestine. So when they exit the small intestine, they have to go through the large intestine. They do not populate at all in the large intestine. Those
No,
bacteria.
no, bacillus, in order for a bacteria to populate, it's got to have like little hooks to grab onto tissue. So it's not designed to. We're part of the problem. We've evolved with the bacillus to carry it to another location and go to the bathroom out there in the woods, and now it's there. So we are not its final host. Lactobacillus and bifidus, we are the host. We are in symbiosis with it for the whole life, if we're lucky. These guys, they're temporary friends that come and go, and that's fine.
And the Akkermansia, I'm assuming that's a large intestine bacteria.
Yeah.
Okay. That's one that often gets overlooked.
So let's talk about Akkermansia, right? Akkermansia mucophilia. It's the one that likes to eat the mucus of the gut, right? And that's important because you don't want too much mucus building up in there. But people will take that as a supplement. I'm like, well, do you have any in your gut? Like, yes, but the test said it was very low. I'm like, you understand that bacteria can double every 20 minutes. So if you feed it properly and the environment is good, that single remaining Akkermansia will be 20 billion in a day, right? So why are we focusing on taking probiotics? You don't need to take most of them. As long as you have one, right? It'll grow. What you really need to do is you need to change the environment so that it grows, right? So it's sort of like someone looking at someone saying, "Oh, I don't have the flowers I want growing. I'll just toss out more seeds." I'm like, "Yeah, but you're tossing seeds onto concrete. They're only going to grow in the cracks. How about you prepare some soil, and then one rose bush will cast out 100 million seeds for you over its lifetime. You're going to have roses everywhere, right?" So
That makes sense. That totally makes sense. Let's talk about some of your products. I'm going to pull up your website. Give me 1 second to share that with you here. All right, here we go. So this, folks, is Remedy Link. And we'll pull you up here to the top here. Some amazing products. What was your very first product you ever made?
It's farther down. It was a chelator. It was a metacardium. It was an EDTA chelator.
Yeah.
And yeah, you'll get everybody busy trying to keep track of. But if you go to the top, I'll walk you through like where we're at now in terms of the order. So like the first thing I want to do is I want to fix the microbiome, right? It's the roots of the body. It's the low hanging fruit. It's easy to do. And the main thing you got to do is you got to get the pH of the stool down to low sixes, high sevens. The reason is, have you ever canned food, Dr. Nichols? You ever done a canning operation?
My grandmother did, my dad did. I watched them do it. I never did it.
Okay, so you only can acidic food, or you have to add acid to it because the kind of bacteria that grow in an acidic medium are typically often good for us, and the ones that grow in a neutral or alkaline, that's botulism and bad things. The gut's a canning operation. It's a fermentation factory, right? You get, if you're healthy, you can get up to 10% of your energy just from fermentation in your gut. And so if the gut is alkaline, all right, so what happens is the bacteria that you want to have in there generate acids that then make it inhospitable for the bad bacteria. And those same acids feed the next set of bacteria, which make other good things, which then feed the next set. And it's this domino effect through the colon. And it starts at the top of the large intestine with the bifida, with the lactic acid bacteria, right? Or the LAB. And they acidify it and everything comes downstream from there. The lactic turns into and then you get acetic, and then you get butyric and propionic, and it's this whole chain reaction through the gut. However, if someone takes antibiotics, the bifidus bacteria, the LAB at the top, are extremely susceptible. They get knocked out or knocked down, right? And they're not making the acids. So now it becomes more alkaline and bad bacteria get it. They actually want it to be alkaline, so they'll start making alkalinity and you get this tug of war. Now, the most important test you can do for your stool is the pH. So you get some pH paper, the 6 to 8 pH paper on a roll, and you press it against the stool, and it'll turn a color, right? If it's blue, it's alkaline. Bad news. If it's green, it's neutral. You're at a standstill. Good and bad, or no one's winning. Although, the body's losing because you don't want the bad guys there at all. And then yellow means it's acidic. Good job. You don't have to have a $3,000 pH probe to see exactly where you're at. You want to get the pH paper basically not to change color. You want to keep it yellow. And that means that it's acidic. The reason it's acidic is because all the good bacteria are making all the good acids, which are suppressing the bad players and helping the immune system. So the products you're looking at the top, Pokageshi, the ingredients in there might support the body's. All right, so there's certain enzymes that bad bacteria use to create ammonia to make it more alkaline. The ingredients in Pokageshi may have an effect may support the body in dealing with that. The Phylomet is the ingredient that the healthy microbiome would make for you. So while you're waiting for it to come online, let's give it a little help. The main thing actually is the one all the way to the right. It's the acidulum. And that is the specific probiotic that selectively feeds the lactic acid bacteria. Right? You don't want to give all the probiotics. If you give all the probiotics while the stool is alkaline or neutral, you're going to feed good and bad. So first, I use acidulum just for the probiotics, just for the lactic acid bacteria. As soon as I see the pH hit 6.5 or lower, then I do the next one, the Panaceum. And that's sort of for the diversity. And that's a mix of prebiotics that you would find as a hunter-gatherer. A lot of what informs my work is, what would my life be like if I were Paleolithic? What would I be getting automatically? I'd be getting prebiotics from mushrooms and shellfish and insects and raw and wild game and honey and seaweed. We're not putting any insects in there, but the idea is to create all of those prebiotics from not necessarily from an insect source, but all of those prebiotics so that you can feed as many different types of bacteria as possible, but you only do it once you've already got the pH properly dialed in. And if you do that, I remember as a kid, I would go to the bathroom, I would defecate like once or twice a week. And no doctor ever said how often you go to the bathroom. They gave me drugs for acne, but no one ever said, how often you defecate. And then I remember reading like hunter-gatherers will go to the bathroom 3 to 5 times a day. I'm like, no, they won't. That's crazy. It's not because they're necessarily eating so much bulk fiber. 90% of stool is water and bacteria. So it's the microbiome. So if you feed the microbiome, you make a lot of stool, which if it's healthy stool, that's great because it's actually generating short-chain fatty acids for your brain. Any case, if you get your pH down to 5.7 to 6.2 by doing this, you may find yourself 2-3 times a day going to the bathroom, which actually is good for you.
as it should be. I've always told clients the bare minimum should be one. If you're not even having one, you're in a world of problem. And I used to have clients come in and tell me that their medical doctor said that if they had one bowel movement a week, they were within the normal range. And I'm like,
Normal.
that's crazy.
Okay. Average and normal, misconstrued. They may be average, but that doesn't mean it's normal or healthy.
Well,
Um,
you're looking at an unhealthy population to formulate that average.
yes. Um, I would say if you eat 3 meals a day, doesn't it stand to reason you should go to the bathroom 3 times a day? Right? Yeah.
When you look at motility and yeah, have you heard of the product? I'm assuming you're familiar with Standard Process.
Sure.
Yeah, they have a product called Zymex.
Hmm.
Now that's for acidification of the intestinals. And so I'm assuming it's working on the same kind of an idea that you're working with yours. That's the idea that they're thinking it needs to have a certain pH.
Yes, I'm not sure that the acids that you take orally are going to make it to the colon and not just be absorbed by the small intestine, nor would they necessarily be the right acids. What you
Gotcha.
want are the way the system, you want to have the system as God made it, as it was designed, which is very specific acids made on site in the amounts that the gut wants, right? So for instance, the Filament product is those acids, but we'll never get moment by moment the exact amount at the location that you could if your microbiome was managing itself. So we want the microbiome to make the acids for us long term. Um, motility that has to, and it's those acids that are feeding the colonocytes so they have the strength and the signals to create motility, right? So
So much going on there.
you want to hit the next. Okay, so now we're looking at removing toxic metals. The Zenoplex, I think that was the third product we ever made. That's the coffee enema glutathione IV combination as a suppository. So we're looking at, like we said in the beginning, phase 1, phase 2, right?
Now, question on that one. If a person uses Zenoplex, now this is in lieu of doing a coffee enema. Let's say they can't do a coffee enema for whatever reason. What type of response should that person expect from taking Zenoplex, and how quickly would they expect that response? I had a excuse
Okay.
me, I had a client take Zenoplex, and within they were waiting and waiting, nothing happened. An hour went by, nothing happened. 2 hours went by, nothing happened, and they were expecting to have like some type of a reaction as far as like an enema, right? And they never had any major bowel
No,
movement.
you're not going to get that from Zenoplex.
Okay.
That's more glytamins. So with Zenoplex, what you're looking at is if they're horrific chemical sensitivities, they're going to be mad at you for day one. So you start them on half a Zenoplex or a quarter of Zenoplex, right, and work them up slowly with strong MCS. They'll be mad at you for day one. You say, look, I told you this is going to happen. Stay with it. Day two, they'll be a little less mad at you. Day three, they'll only be mildly upset. You say, okay, now it's time for half a suppository. By the time day 10 comes along, they're not reacting to it, which is a very good sign, and they'll usually be very pleased. So what would you expect from Zenoplex? Maybe nothing at all. It depends on top. Like if a person's really toxic, of the kind of toxins it can remove, they might just feel like they're in a better mood or they've got more energy, that kind of thing. The Zenoplex, which is the liver gallbladder flush um, replacement, that's the one that's more likely to give you that kind of reaction. But again,
Glutamins.
vitamins, right? However,
Vitamins.
we're not trying to get you to give birth to a bunch of stones. The idea is if you can melt them out, then much easier. So if a person does glutamins and then gets a colonic, they might see a bunch of stones and bile and sludge come out. But if they don't get a colonic, unless, if they pay attention, they might say, wow, look at all that stuff coming out of my stool. But, the idea is not to explode out 50 stones. The idea is slowly get them out. And again, we don't just want to get them out of the gallbladder. We want to get them out of the liver as well.
Absolutely.
Colophage, if you're familiar with the German protocol with Plaquex, where they used to inject bile and phosphatidylcholine into people, and that's a recreation of that. And albendextrin, which is going to be rectal probably within the next month, is a whole new world in alternative medicine about what it can do. And what cyclodextrins, it's a cyclodextrin product. What cyclodextrins can do is they can bind to cholesterol and certain fatty toxins. So people who do cyclodextrins have been reporting some outstanding results in terms of arterial issues because plaque is to a large extent going to be lipid based.
Interesting. Good stuff here.
So now we're getting into the metal world, and then you see Captamet is the hard metal, strong but slow chelator. Dasamet is the medium speed, soft metal chelator. Velamet, when it comes in, will be the hard metal chelator that has the methyl groups on it we talked about. Metacardium is a hard metal medium speed chelator. I don't sell the lightweight chelators because you can get those, right? I mean, you can go and buy magnesium and potassium citrates for the hard metals, and you can go buy alpha lipoic acid for the soft. That's readily available. Now moving on to additional detoxifiers. So bicarbonate. So if you look at someone's blood work and their blood CO2, I like it to be around 27. If it gets above 27, I'm thinking that they have problems with their lungs, in which case we'll look at the alvectin product next. But if it's under 27, why are they not making enough CO2? CO2 is the metabolic waste of the system, right? So if there's low CO2, either they're hyperventilating and or what's going on is they're not burning fuel properly. Like, if you had a car and there was not a lot of gas coming out of the muffler, that would tell you there's not a lot of work happening in the engine. So the engines of the mitochondria. So when there's not a lot of CO2, that is a mitochondrial, that's telling you something's up with the mitochondria. Typically, that's going to be mold or metals are going to interfere with mitochondria. Bicarbonate is bicarbonates, but they're made in such a way that they will bypass, if you take it properly, which is first thing in the morning, large glass of water, don't eat for half an hour. If you get them into the small intestine, then the bicarbonate doesn't waste itself in the stomach, neutralizing stomach acid, and it opens in the small intestine, which is where the bicarbonates naturally come out from the bile and the pancreas. They make bicarbonate to neutralize the stomach acid and to activate the intestinal enzymes. But the other thing is what they found out is that bicarbonates, once you get them past the stomach, have an extraordinary effect on the spleen, which is the biggest lymph node in the body. And bicarbonates have been shown to shift the macrophages, some of the white blood cells, from the inflammatory to the non-inflammatory model within about 2 weeks. And then, of course, one of the nicest things you can do for the kidneys is raise the bicarbonate level. What they found is that people who have chronic kidney disease, usually it just gets worse and worse and worse, and they end up in dialysis. People that take bicarbonates, usually it stabilizes, and sometimes you get a little uptick of an improvement. So bicarbonates are one of the few things you can actually improve kidney function with, along with
Interesting.
chelator. The alvectin, like I said, if someone's got a lung issue, if you look at the way the lungs work, there are things called lung surfactants, and it's actually what you give to newborn babies when their lungs aren't properly formed. And if you were able to give somebody lung surfactants, you would help them bind. So two of the lung surfactants bind or tag toxins or infections for the white blood cells to grab onto. And two of them are there to keep the water out of the alveoli. Like if you put a little bit of water on a smooth table and put a pot on it, and you try to lift the pot up, you can't easily because the surface tension in the water makes it very difficult. It's the same thing with water in the lungs. That's why people could drown with just a little bit of water in their lungs, because they get in the alveoli and make it very hard for the alveoli to expand. I personally think that lung surfactants should be in every lifeguard booth in the by the beach, because we've seen water clear out of lungs with lung surfactants and in 24 hours, much faster than any other way. If you actually ever see anybody who dies from drowning, you see they cough up a lot of white foam. That's all their surfactant coming out. It's kind of horrific. I travel with alvectin. The two things I travel with is alvectin and ivermectin. And the alvectin, what I do is I just take it so that I've always got support of the lung surfactant system. So if I'm in planes or whatever, I'm not saying I've never got sick. I did two trade. I did the last two times I was on a flight, or not the last two. I was at a trade show in Vegas. Who's is an enormous trade show with tens of thousands of people, and half the vendors were sick for 2 weeks afterwards. I didn't get sick, and neither did any of my staff. I went to another trade show, and I saw somebody there, and he was coughing, and I'm like, "Let me guess, were you at Vegas?" He goes, "3 months ago." He goes, "Yeah." I'm like, "And you still haven't got rid of that cough?" He goes, "No." I said, "You want to try something?" He goes, "Sure." Take out a bottle. I hand him a few. I'm like, "Okay, just so you know, you might cough like mad in about half an hour. Just hang with it." On cue, half an hour later, he starts coughing, he's coughing. Comes back the next day, he's like, the cough's gone. I'm like, okay, that's what surfactants are supposed to do. Because the way the lungs work is you've got the cilia in the lungs and the mucus formation, and they're constantly draining, So the sinuses drain stuff into the back of your throat, and the
Right.
lungs push it up, and then all of this gets swallowed and comes out. There's no mucus and cilia in the alveoli, the structures that actually trans have the oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange, because then it wouldn't be able to do it.
Right.
So it uses lung surfactants to clean out the alveoli. So if someone's low on surfactants because they're breathing in all this polluted air, and who is it? Then the alveoli can't clean themselves out, and it's arguable whether we can ever regrow alveoli or not. Maybe some of the Russian peptides might do it. But the things you really want to take care of as you get older, your kidneys, your alveoli, and your central nerve and your nerves. That includes the brain, because those are the three things that take the longest to heal if they do at all.
How does this affect someone with chronic asthma?
So be very careful. If you give someone with chronic asthma, you're going to give them a very small amount in the beginning because you don't want to have them have too much come out, right? I would go very slowly. I would also look to the sinuses. Why? Because the sinuses make nitric oxide, and what's going on with asthma, right? The issue with the nitric oxide, the issue,
Restriction.
right? The immune dysfunction. So, yeah.
Interesting. Interesting.
Protolase was something that we worked on when people were talking about spike proteins and how do you deal with that. Zoibin on the right-hand side. So again, back to the Paleolithic. If you look at food that's available now, it is not what was available 2,000 years ago, right? The tubers of today, the potatoes versus the tubers of yesteryear, which were like burdock. The ones we have now are fluffy and there's no bitterness and they're very sugary and they're super easy to digest. That means they have no fiber, no bitters. They're super high glycemic index. You think you're eating healthy, but the only fruit that you can eat that's normal would be acai and camu. Everything else has been altered because for 10,000 years, we've been taking fruits and vegetables and grains and beans and saying, make them bigger, make them sweeter, make them softer, make them fluffier, make them less bitter. And as a result, we've got these super sugary things with no bitters in them to suppress, because the bitter is the medicine of the plant, right? There's two medicines in a plant, bitters and essential oils. Now, the bitters we have selectively bred out. So they're not there. And the essential oils, even if you were to go and say, hey, I get essential oils, I eat oregano, great. Did you get it from your garden today? Or was it in a glass vial that's been sitting on a shelf? Or I eat vegetables, great. When were they harvested? Because essential oils will vaporize off. So we're not getting the essential oils and the bitters, which are in the normal ways in which biofilms are suppressed in the body. We outsource our pharmacy to the plants and the bacteria that live on them. That's our original pharmacy. All the plants, meats too, right? You eat animal tissue, that's all the peptides. So the original pharmacy is the peptides from the organs. We don't eat organs anymore, right? We eat muscle. We don't eat heart or kidney or brain or sweet, or all the internal organs. Too bad. We should, right? We don't, the vegetables and fruits and nuts and seeds are Frankensteins compared to what they used to be. And then we wash them so we don't get the bacteria anymore. So
completely. Yeah.
right. So the zoibid is the essential oils and the bitters that you would get if you were eating Paleolithically. If you could find okay, if you can go, you can still get them some places. Like you can get taro root in Hawaii is relatively the same Paleolithically. Burdock is, sunchokes, if you don't mind having flatulence nonstop from the inulin. It's hard to eat Paleolithically, so that's the hack.
Yeah.
What else we got here? Oh, then we got some things. The Testament is something second from the right. That's there's an enzyme the body makes, DAO, which breaks down histamine. So the way histamine works is the body creates histamine typically, as a response to to parasites. And so all the histamine reactions are reactions of trying to get rid of a parasite. So it makes you sneeze, your nose run to get the parasites out of your nose, right? It gives you the runs to get them out of your gut. Makes you itch to make them scratch them off your skin. However, a lot of people end up with excess histamine reactions because their
Yes.
immune system gets dysregulated because certain infections will push you. All right, so what ends up happening is some of these chronic infections like Lyme and Staph and some of these other ones, they try to convince the body that they're parasites so that the body responds with a parasitic reaction as opposed to what it should react to. So they'll respond with a Th2 histamine response rather than a Th1 response. It's a hack that they go. And now the body's fighting with the wrong weapon. And so people end up with all these histamine reactions because of the chronic infections in their sinus and their gut. And it plays out all sorts of places. I mean, things you wouldn't expect can be histamine mediated. So for instance, like interstitial cystitis is a histamine reaction. Certain types of brain issues are histamine. Histamine causes all sorts of weird things in the body you would not think are histamine, or you wouldn't associate with it as a result of the microbiome, which is why microbiome is first, right? So if you can increase the DAO, the enzyme which breaks down histamine, that is supportive, but at the end of the day, you have to figure out why is the histamine up? So we started the microbiome. Once the microbiome is dialed in, then we go after the chemicals. Why? Because if the gut's off and you try to detoxify chemicals, you can get deconjugation in the gut and you can recycle the chemical toxins. So we get the gut, then we get the chemicals. Once we've done that, we go after the metals, and then we can start, looking at these ones over here aren't necessarily in order. They're just various things. Um, there's some other things. The pancremet was something that was based on the work of Kelly and Gonzalez and Beard, if you're familiar with the pancreatic protocols for that, which we could discuss one day. That's a whole hour-long conversation. Should we see what's next down there?
Yep. Brain and nervous system. What we got
Okay,
there?
so what do we got there? So nervadine is nervonic acid. That is unlike most animals that are born with finished and complete nervous systems. They can walk the moment they hit the ground. Humans, we're half baked, right? Because the brain can't get any bigger without, killing the woman in childbirth, or women are going to have hips, that don't make them able to walk properly. So we have to finish some of our development outside of the womb. You drink breast milk, you get nervonic acid in the breast milk, and the nerves are myelinated. But if you didn't get breast milk because they were convinced that that was animalistic and old-fashioned, and you should really be getting soy protein and sugar uh,
Yes.
in formula, and then you don't get the nervonic acid, and the nerves never properly myelinate, which is the insulation on the nerve. Or if someone has metals, specifically mercury, they demyelinate. So that's a source of myelin. That's a source of nervonic acid if you want to try to support the remyelination process. Um, the autonomous, we discussed, that's something we can. So a lot of people talk about adaptogens. A true adaptogen is something that normalizes you, right? So ginseng isn't an adaptogen necessarily, because if you get too much ginseng, it's too intense, right?
Probably more of a tonic.
Yeah, but they call them an adaptogen,
Yeah.
right? Because there's two definitions of adaptogen. One is it normalizes you. If you're high, it brings you down. If you're low, it brings you up. And the other is if you give it to a mouse, you drop them in water, they can swim longer before they drown. It's horrible, but that's what they do. So some like ginseng is that kind of adaptogen. It'll give you more strength, but at a cost, right?
Right.
So I gathered the adaptogens that you could take every day that were true adaptogens, meaning they brought you to homeostasis.
No, ashwagandha.
Yeah, right. So there's ashwagandhas. So there's a few things that are true adaptogens that don't cause long-term problems. Some of them you really don't want to take every day. If we were to slide down a little bit, Then you would see, okay, so that 1 second from the left, that's the fogging system. And what do you do if you have mold in your house? And it's one of the easiest ways to check is, are people in your house healthy and happy? If you got someone sick in your house, or if people are arguing, decent chance there's mold in there. Well, statistically, most houses have mold in them anyway. So odds are there's mold in the house, right? Just because of the way they're constructed. And yes, you can remediate, and you should, and rip out the bad drywall and fix the holes in the roof from the solar panels you had put in, and rip out all the insulation and pull up the subfloor and yada, yada, yada. If you do that and you keep the humidity at 40%, you can keep new mold from growing. But the issue is the toxins that they created. The mycotoxins are extremely resistant to being broken down. And if you've had mold in a house for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, right, then there's an enormous amount of mycotoxins everywhere. And every time you walk around, they're being exposed to it, and it's wrecking them. It's just ripping up the adrenal glands and messing with the nervous system and throwing off the hormones and causing all these problems. So you want a fogger for 2 reasons. One, you want to support breaking down the mold until you can remediate the house properly, which even if you think you've remediated it properly, you might not have, unless you own the equipment to test yourself. So you're going to hopefully you get it remediated if you can afford it. Hopefully, but to the degree that it is not remediated or not remediated properly, you want to fog the house with something non-toxic that'll kill the spores. And
Citrus-based.
I use a 50-to-1 dilution of Sanidate, which is acetic acid and hydrogen peroxide.
Okay.
The other one, so I wanted to, and then what you also want to do is you want to break down the toxins, because even if the mold goes away, if you've got 20 years of the toxins everywhere, and every time you walk on the carpet, you breathe it in, it's still not going to get better, right? So I built, I got these 2 foggers. There's a $40,000 one and a $90,000 one, and they were both junk. I mean, really. They both use hydrogen peroxide, which is not strong enough to do the job. I got this tester where I could read mold in the air live, and I could see they didn't do the job. They weren't, and the reason these people can get away with this is because, unless you've got a $40,000 mold testing sampler, you're not going to know, right? So they figure most people won't have that. Well, I got one because I wanted to know, and these things didn't work. I said, hey guys, the hydrogen peroxide solution you're doing, maybe it's fine during the days of COVID for viruses. It's not working for mold. And they're like, yeah, it is. I'm like, no, it's not. And here's the proof. They're like, oh, all right, well, here's your money back. Don't badmouth us. I'm like, anyway, so it turns out what you want is Sanidate. That's the stuff that works, but it'll destroy most foggers. Either the foggers will destroy the Sanidate if it's a thermal fogger, if it's not cold, or the Sanidate will destroy the fogger if there's metal pumps and nozzles. So I had one built that could handle the ingredient that I wanted. And you fog the place, you knock down the mycotoxins, you knock down the mold, you knock down the bacteria and the viruses. I couldn't imagine living in a house without one of these things now because, when I travel and I stay at Airbnbs, as I'm traveling to, do various jobs, do various projects, every place I go to, every Airbnb I go to, not every single one has had an enormous mold problem. And you couldn't tell. It's not like you can see mold. It's not like the place didn't smell bad. There was no black stuff growing up the walls. These were nice homes, that were being well maintained, and they were all loaded.
Mold is one of those insidious things that most people don't realize how much it's affecting them.
The big shockers for me in the last year were mold and the sinuses, and then how they interact. The two of them work together. There were the two sleeping things. So yeah, fogging is huge. You can fog it with 2 different things. You can fog it with Sanidate, or you can also fog with hydrogen peroxide, or you can fog it with hypochlorous acid. And depending on whether or not you're able to remove the electronics out of your room, I'll make suggestions on which one you would use. You can fog your HVAC system, but you can also damage electronics in there if you do it wrong. There's a whole art to what to do with an HVAC. If I'm in an Airbnb, I just shut the HVAC off, open the windows, and fog the place. I won't have an HVAC on anywhere I go to now because I know what's in them.
Right.
You open up enough plenums, which is the big box after the blower and HVAC, you look inside and you see the disgusting colonies of mold and bacteria that are in there. You're like, I don't want to be breathing that stuff. I'll just open the
Yeah.
windows. Um,
Chlorine dioxide is another
yeah,
one that's used
you
a lot.
can, but you would have to get the one that's a gas, and that's not
Yeah.
something you're doing on your own. If you get the one that's liquid, that's gonna not go necessarily where you want to go, won't go to gas phase, and it'll tear up your electronics. So,
So chlorine dioxide affects electronics adversely.
oh yeah,
So if it's in a gas form and it
it,
settles,
yeah. I mean, if you want to do it properly, you can clean out the HVAC if it's a metal HVAC. If it's fiberglass or ducting, you can't clean it. If it's metal, you can get in there and rotor brush and clean and vacuum it out. And then if you want to do it properly, what you do is you put a dehumidifier after the AC unit, and you put a really and then you upgrade your blower so that it can handle pushing through some HVAC filters.
yeah. Yeah, mold is something that I think a lot of people don't realize they're being affected by, and it affects far more people than people think. Far more people.
Yeah.
Um,
Here, I'll give you a fun little thing you can do, right? I like testing that you can do on your own. I like the pH testing for the stool. Um, I'm going to tell you how you can check if you have sleep apnea, because a lot of people have sleep apnea or hypopnea, which is their breathing hasn't stopped, but it's constricted, right? And a lot of this is coming from mold and mycotoxins. That's one of the big drivers for it because it causes inflammation. And it's like almost like a compartment syndrome. There's just not a lot of space in the airway. If the tongue swells, if the soft palate swells, if the sinuses swell, there's just not a lot of space there to begin with. Um, if you dream, if you have a dream that's frustrating, like you're trying to do something and it just won't work, or you're running in a dream, that's hypopnea. That's the airway is closed down so much that you're still getting air, but not a lot. And the body interprets that as, well, I'm as frustration or running in a dream.
Interesting.
Yeah. If you have apnea, that's violence. Either you're being violent to someone else or they're being violent to you. Or you're being held underwater or you can't breathe in a dream. And if you wake up with your heart pounding or if there's any sweat on you, that's another smoking gun that you've gotten into sympathetic overdrive. And so apnea drives an enormous number of issues, right? The hypoxia shifts the person into hibernation, and then they start gaining weight that they can never get rid of, and they lose all their testosterone, and it stresses the heart and the brain. I have two of my best friends at different times. I shared a hotel room with when we were traveling, and they only had one hotel room. They were supposed to have two. Like, just crash with me. And the other time we were at a trade show, and we just, known the guy for 20 years, so we just shared the room. And both of them had apnea while they were sleeping, and they didn't know. And I recorded one of them. I'm like, and the first guy was so pissed. He's like, "Stop waking me up!" I'm, "Dude, you're choking." And and later on, he thanks me once a week now, and he has done for the last several years, because once we figured out that he had apnea and we were able to fix it, or he was able to get it resolved, that was probably what was driving all of his heart attacks.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. The second guy, he would breathe and then stop breathing for 30 seconds and then breathe and all night long, 30 seconds of not breathing all night long. I recorded it for him. I could probably even play it for you. It's probably on here on my phone. And I'm like, "You have apnea?" He goes, "Do I?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's pretty bad." He's like, "Ah, whatever." I'm like, "I listened to this," and I played it. He's like, "Oh my God, is that?" He's like, because you could hear him choking and gasping for breath, like someone's throttling his throat all night long, minute after minute after minute, and it was all up in his sinuses. So now, I'm not saying that I put balloons up in his sinuses and gave him the adjustment, but that adjustment was very helpful for him. Open things up, because he'd gotten hit in the face, probably because he played football and it collapsed his sinuses a little. But what we really need to do. But he lives in Costa Rica, which means his house is full of mold, which means he's got all this stuff. And the thing is, when you live in a house with mold, you're breathing in the mycotoxins. The mycotoxins are fat soluble. They get in the sinuses and they build up year after year after year because you can't get rid of them by washing them out. Remember, you have to use something fat soluble. You have to make them water soluble again to get them out. Anyway, yeah.
I'm excited for your new products. Those sinus products sound really amazing.
Yeah, and the nice thing is if they're going to help, you're usually going to feel it pretty darn fast.
Well, I will be one of the first people purchasing that. So I'll be looking back and forth to your website to see when those come on the market.
Sure.
Well, Spencer, I've got a way that I've been closing out my podcast this year, and I don't know if you've watched any of the episodes to see this, but there's two questions I want to ask you. So the first question is, what annoys you?
What annoys me about myself or the world, either way.
Oh, it can be whatever you want to choose. What is it that really uh,
Sure. What annoys me?
creates annoyance for you? What is it that annoys you?
Um, my misunderstanding of the fact that everything is happening for a reason, and my my judging that something isn't playing out the way it has to. It's a problem of my own perception, you know? It's like, oh, all right, I'm judging that. But why is that happening? How can I help? What I like to do is I so there's, kind of two classic ends of a spectrum on how to deal with things that bother you, right? There's the stoic, which is I'm not going to let anything bother me, but that leads one towards the potential of suppressing it,
Mhm.
suppressing emotions. And then there's the normal path, which is like to engage and indulge in it, like, oh, I'm really annoyed by this, right? But then that's giving energy to it in a way that may not be healthy for us. And then like the third way is to the positive movement. Everything's perfect, serenity now. But that's not sustainable because a lot of the positive movement people commit suicide because they're not being honest with themselves. So,
Well, now you're denying.
right, another way of doing it. So my solution is I want to honor the fact that I'm experiencing this particular emotion, right? But I also want to not indulge in it. I want to take it down one notch. So for fear, I will say if I feel like I'm afraid of something in my language, I'll say I'm mindful of that. I'm aware of that. Right? I turn fear into mindfulness. If I'm angry, if I say, "Boy, I'm really angry that such and such did this," I'll rephrase that as inconvenient. Boy, it's really inconvenient that that guy nearly hit me while he was driving because he's on his cell phone. Right? All right. I'm not being stoic and I'm not being, I'm just okay. So if you ask what irritates me, I would put that under the anger category. So anger goes to inconvenience, right? If I get really attached to something and I'm really upset that I'm not getting the outcome I want, I will, rather than I want or need it, my hack will be, I prefer that this happen. I would really prefer that it goes in this way. It may not, right? Um, but I prefer it. And then let me see, there's another one. Uh, anger, fear, oh, sadness, right? So if I'm really sad at the loss of something, I'll say, I'll say, oh, that's a setback. That's a bummer, rather than it's heartbreaking. So to answer your question is, it's not necessarily what irritates me. It's more, can I be present enough with my internal narrative to use language in a way that empowers a healthy response to it? Long question.
Have you ever gotten into the work of Marshall Rosenberg?
And I know the name. Are you talking about
Nonviolent communication.
nonviolent NBC?
Yeah,
Nonviolent. Yeah, yeah, great stuff with
yeah.
puppets.
A lot of, yeah, exactly. Yeah, the giraffe and the jackal. Um, the last question is just the opposite of that. What brings you joy?
I I'm not necessarily looking for joy as much as I was when I was younger because it's unsustainable. I think at this point I'm looking more for like contentment. I do like a little bit of joy, but it's sort of like a spice. I'm not gonna sit, I don't want to have my entire meal be dessert. So what I would say is the thing that makes me the happiest is being in beautiful natural environments. And when I hear from clients that something helped them, something that I made help them with a problem that they've had for decades that nothing else fixed. I would say that feeling like you've been of service or being of service is a particularly joyful experience.
I love that. I love that. And I connect with that. I can really relate to that. That's excellent. Well, Spencer, thank you for coming on to this program and thank you for sharing your wisdom. It's going to take me another watching of this myself to parse through all the mounds of information that you were able to impart for us. I think it was very valuable. And like I said, I'm really excited and a little anxious to get a hold of these new sprays that you're talking about. I'm expecting really good things from those.
Yeah, please give me your clinical experience with them when you get them, because I'm creating them and I've got a very small end value of the people I'm doing with, but I'm I need to get the feedback from the practitioners to say, oh, well, did you know it's really working very well with this? I'm like, oh, I wouldn't have thought. So it's really helpful for me to understand the kind of things that helps that only happen when you get the feedback of hundreds and hundreds of people trying something.
100%. Yeah, I've already got a handful of clients who I think uh, would be interesting to see what happens when they start adding that into their daily.
Yeah, we're probably 3 weeks out. I just have to get the labels made. It
Yeah,
was just this morning that I finally got the formulas exactly the way I wanted to. So yeah.
excellent, excellent. Well, Spencer, thank you very much, and for all you who have been watching this program, I hope you got a lot out of it. I know I did, and I will see you on the flip side.